welcome to the Vibrant Through Menopause Facebook group. I love talking about symptoms, why they're happening, when they're happening, why some women get certain symptoms and other women don't, and really a way to navigate through this transition in our lives. So I'm really pleased today to welcome Rachel Posner. Did I say it right?
You did.
Okay. I know somebody who's Rosner, so wanted to make sure. She's a yoga therapist, so we have our yoga background in common, and she's a mindfulness coach who helps people reduce stress, build resilience, and thrive. And her work is informed by the connection of mindfulness, neuroscience, and psychology. So a lot of us, when we're in perimenopause, we feel like so many of our symptoms are really just about what we're eating or how we're sleeping. And there's so much more to that, and how stress can really impact those symptoms as well. So this might be surprising to some of you, but today we're going to talk about time in nature. So Rachel, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So what does nature have to do with perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms?
Well, the direct connection is stress, right? We know that we can only produce so many hormones, right? We don't really produce stress hormones and sex hormones at the same time. So anything that we can do to lower stress will have a positive effect on lowering our menopausal symptoms, because we're not producing estrogen and progesterone and also producing cortisol. So when we're stressed, when we're in the stress response, we release cortisol. I think probably you guys have talked about this before, but people don't always recognize that being in nature can have a huge effect on the stress response. So there is quite a bit of research on this these days. And one of the things that we know is the stress response, which is that fight or flight response, gets triggered when the amygdala is like your alarm bell. When the amygdala says there's a problem, there's danger. I know sometimes the danger is our children are late, or, it's not like we're being chased down by a tiger, but inside we still feel like we're in danger. So the amygdala sounds that alarm, and then a cascade of events happen, including releasing cortisol. So when cortisol is released, we stop producing sex hormones. One of the things that we know now is that spending time in nature can reduce the activation of the amygdala, both while we're in nature and after. So it's sort of a gift that keeps on giving. That's the quickest way of saying it, that there is a response in nature that turns down that amygdala response and turns up our parasympathetic response, which is our rest and digest system.
Exactly. This is so interesting, because I was just thinking about the way that you put it, about that if we're producing stress hormones, we can't produce our sex hormones. And for a lot of women who are trying to conceive, they are unable to, and due to a lot of stress. And there are, so many stories about couples who decide to adopt, and as soon as they adopt, then they conceive naturally. So what we know is if the body is not feeling like it's in a safe place, in a very optimal place, that our most basic functions are not going to be optimal. And that includes digestion as well. And I talk a lot about that, because if we're constantly stressed when we're eating, it's not just going to give us digestive issues, but we're not getting the full benefits of the food that we're eating. So I always say this, you can be eating the most perfectly balanced organic food, even that you prepared yourself, and you are stressed out, you are not going to benefit from anything in that meal. So it's very much connected about it. And we are looking for ways to reduce stress. And when most women come to me, they're thinking about how they can, eat better, or maybe sleep better, or exercise more. But there are really simple things like being in nature that can make a huge, huge difference. And you talked about how while it's while you're in nature and while you and the gift that keeps on giving. So can you tell us some of the health benefits? Because I know you have a lot of science on it and benefits about being outside.
Sure. Again, it's all about your parasympathetic nervous system. And this is the system we want to strengthen. So that's your rest and digest system. And the sympathetic is your fight flight system. Anytime you're strengthening the parasympathetic, you're weakening the sympathetic. So those two systems work hand in hand. It's not only that you're deactivating the amygdala and that fight or flight response, but when you do that, you strengthen the parasympathetic response. And when we spend more time in that parasympathetic system, which is sometimes called vagal tone, oftentimes you hear the words rest and digest. When you're in your happy place is another way you might say it. All the systems work better. Your immune system, your reproductive system, your endocrine system, every system in your body works better when your parasympathetic system is strong. And nature is a place that strengthens it. There are a few reasons, I think, that happens. And that is because what we need to turn on that parasympathetic nervous system is to feel safe and to feel connected. And when you are in nature, and I'm not talking about being in nature on a 40% elevation ski slope, right? I'm talking about being in nature in a place that you feel comfortable. Nature is the place that helps cultivate an internal experience of safety. So, for example, I could be in my room right now and not necessarily feel safe. I know cognitively that I'm not under any kind of threat, but I just have the anxiety of the day going on. And so I'm not really internalizing a feeling of safety or connection necessarily. But when we grow feelings of safety and connection, we turn on that parasympathetic response. And this is something that nature does. Like anyone can probably take a moment to think about a place that they've been outside where everything just calmed down. There's a lot of reasons, and I can get a little bit more into some of the specific benefits beyond what I just mentioned. But when everything calms down and you feel that sense of safety and connection, right? We can't always explain that connection, but oftentimes when we're outdoors, we just feel like we're not alone. Whether it's a sense of oneness, whether we feel more connected to the humans that we're with in the outdoors, we cultivate that experience of connection when we're in nature. Safety and connection equal a sympathetic response.
It's really interesting. I can't remember if we talked about this. So I grew up in New York City, in Manhattan, and I loved it. I loved all the culture. I loved all the nightlife and the fun. And then I was actually, when I had been doing yoga for quite some time, I noticed like all summer, I was trying to get out of the city. I mean, I always had been, I wanted to go to the beach. I wanted to go to the mountains. And then in the winter, I was trying to escape to have, some sun, some warmth and things like that. And as I began working more and more online, I realized that I had a choice. And so I moved to sunny San Diego. And a lot of that was for my well-being, for my mental health, for my emotional health, and obviously for my physical health, because I can be outside more. And I never really, I thought about it this way, but I never thought about it in terms of the parasympathetic nervous system. And, people like joke about how people, in Southern California are just kind of different and from like East Coast and hustle bustle and that. And there must be something connected with how much we are outside and the ocean is here and there's more space and we can see the sky. And for people who don't live in an environment like that, what are the simple ways? Like you said, it doesn't have to be on a ski slope, but what are some ways that people can feel like they're in nature? Maybe if they do live in a city, or what do you think?
So there's a few things. One of the things I always recommend is find a special place, right? This could be a 2-foot square place where there's a plant outside, right? Any kind of nature is better than no nature. It does not, we don't have to be relaxing on a beach in Mexico, right? So studies show that people who work in an environment where there's a window where you can see a tree feel happier in the workplace than people who don't have a window or have a window that's looking out onto traffic. So finding spaces where you can have some connection, even if you don't have time to be taking a nature walk. Even imagery can be helpful, whether that is imagery that you look at like your screensaver. Beautiful images also bring in a sense of calm. And oftentimes I guide people in mindfulness journeys where we are imagining with our eyes closed places that we feel safe and connected in nature. So I think part of it is looking at really what's accessible to you and then going after that.
Yeah.
And I think what holds people back oftentimes is they think they have to do the hour walk in the wilderness or it doesn't count. And they don't realize that there are lots of kind of simpler versions of that that can really have a huge impact on our mental health.
I just thought of a couple of things. Number one, I was at the dentist last week and there were the most beautiful nature images. It was like a time lapse of orchids opening and some like dolphins swimming. And that's exactly what that's for, is like for you to start to relax. For so many people, the dentist is a very, very stressful place. And then I was thinking about, before I became a yoga teacher, I had a job for a couple of years in Midtown, and there was no window. It was like an internal, like it had 4 walls and a door, but there was nothing. And I was not happy. I kept falling asleep, and I had the kind of job that I was sort of in and out a lot, but I just could not get anything done there. And it was not a happy time for me. And, the job wasn't right and all of that, but that must have really contributed to it. So even if somebody's just like taking a little walk around the window, or if they have, especially if it's really cold outside, just to sit by a window and look outside or look at that imagery. I mean, we can all do that. We're out at our computer and just like take a couple minutes, watch the flowers, the time lapse, and you can get all of this like in a second by searching, and just breathe.
This is why people often use nature sounds, because if you're using nature sounds, it becomes a little bit more accessible to close your eyes and imagine yourself to be here, to be there. And it is amazing, just the impact that imagery can have. So bringing yourself into places of refuge and really using your senses. So in the same way, a piece of how we need to be in nature has to do with mindfulness. Because I could be sitting in nature and spend the whole entire time thinking about my to-do list. And I just am not going to get the same benefits, because one of the benefits that we receive from nature is because we're in an experience of passive attention. So if you think about how you move through your day, for the most part, you're in active attention. You're constantly getting something done and needing to focus in a particular way in order to get that thing done. But when we come into nature, we try to shift into passive attention, meaning we really notice what's happening in our body. We're experiencing what we're experiencing, but nature is not requiring anything of us. It's not asking us to do anything or produce anything or even to engage with it in any particular way. So we get to expand our perception. And that's really important for our brain. In fact, when we expand our perception in that kind of passive attentive way, we improve our attention networks. We get stuff done better and more productively when we're doing it, when we've had that break. So nature gives us a break, and that's why it has a positive impact on the attention networks in our brain. So I just like to say a little bit about how we want to be there. There's that more passive experience, but we can also use our senses. Now, this is whether I'm on an hour-long nature walk or looking at an image on my computer. I can still come into my senses, notice what I'm feeling in my body. I can notice the sounds. If my eyes are closed, I can bring myself into the imagery of it. I really want to bring the experience alive, because the more I bring that experience alive, the more present I am, and the less my attention is moving to the past or the future. So the other reason nature is wonderful for your parasympathetic nervous system is, when approached this way, it can be a mindfulness practice. Right? Anytime we're in the present, we're not in the past or the future, we are building that parasympathetic response.
Yeah. Yeah. So the sympathetic nervous system, again, is fight or flight, freeze. And when women are in that constantly, because they're late with the kids and they have a to-do list, and I was just speaking with a woman earlier, she's like, I just don't stop. It's just constant. And even the exercising is part of a to-do. And for many women, they feel like, well, I just need to exercise more. I just need, I need to clean my diet. I need to exercise more. But that actually can create more stress. And it's hard to wrap. Many women find this hard to wrap their mind around, that actually doing less is going to help them reduce their symptoms like hot flashes and the mood swings and the night sweats. So can you explain a little bit more about that again, how when we're overloaded with the stress hormones, then our sex hormones are not released and then these imbalances occur?
Yeah. So one way you can think about it that I like to explore is, on a scale of 1 to 10, right this minute, what's your stress level? And that's a really good marker to ask yourself throughout the day. So you can start to get to know when you're starting to feel amped. And the amped might not have anything to do with the challenges. It can just often be, like the woman you were just referencing, one too many things. So when there's one too many things on our plate, which can include all the things that we think of as self-care, right? There's still things that we're doing. And when we have one too many things, we'll start to notice that our energy is getting to feel more and more intense. We might not register that as fight or flight, but it is low level fight or flight, like how we wake up in the morning. Now, I'm not saying sometimes I don't wake up in the morning already stressed, but in my ideal world,
Right.
I wake up at a 1 and some challenges come in, and maybe I make my way to a 5, and then I check in and I have something to eat, and I do 2 minutes of breathing even, and I drop back down to a 3. We're going to fluctuate throughout the day. But when we're going, we're not going to fluctuate. We're going to build and build and build. And so then it doesn't matter how many things we threw in there, like a healthy meal and an hour at the gym, we're still in that building mode. And when we're in that building mode, we're getting cortisol in our system, and we're dropping we're diminishing our sex hormone. So what I would say is, one, to just reinforce what you just said, sometimes maybe that exercise time, if that's what we're carving out, could be a passive walk, could be a wandering with a serious intention to try over and over to feel into what we're noticing in the body instead of thinking about our day. Because the rehashing of the day oftentimes just builds the stress. So we're in what we're trying to do, we're trying to experience this sort of relaxing, taking things down a notch exercise. And instead, we are ramping up around everything that went wrong. We're in the past, we're in the future. So a big piece of how we relax is to come into the present, because generally the present is pretty great. I mean, I'm not saying always we deal with stressors, but usually the stress we're experiencing is the worry about the past and the future, how we did, how we're going to do. So if we can find times in the day, whether it's 2-minute pauses at the top of the hour to breathe, or a half-hour walk that is not a speed walk, that is not counting towards our exercise regime, I do think that that's when we start to elevate our health and actually lose weight, because we stop. Cortisol causes belly fat. It does. That's a big reason why in menopause, we tend to hold more weight in the middle. Oftentimes it's because we're upping our cortisol and lowering estrogen and progesterone.
Yeah.
So really wrapping your head around the benefit of that, so you can feel like a relaxing walk counts towards my well-being and towards my other goals.
I love that. And it's a lot of women will say to me, what am I missing? What's the missing piece? And there might not be an extra piece to add. It may be that taking something out, taking a piece out is actually what can be the biggest help. One last question, and I just want to check to see in the chat, Dawn has had a question also here on Zoom. So so many women are telling me, well, I had my hormones tested and these hormones are lowered, and that's why I need to replace the hormones. And I speak with other women like, well, I just need to get my hormones tested, as though that's going to be the answer for everything. So can you please speak to that, Rachel?
So what I would say is sometimes even if you replace hormones, now this is out of my scope of expertise,
Okay.
but my personal experience and what my understanding is that sometimes even if you replace hormones, that's still just a Band-Aid. So you can replace the hormones, but your body still can't really process them and integrate them well.
Yeah.
That's why oftentimes I think women are trying hormone replacement and they're not seeing the results that they want. Because if you're not dealing with the underlying issues, you're not going to see that much of a change, even if you're adding the hormones in.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we are completely on the same page, and you're more versed than I am about the hormones themselves and have all that science behind it. So I appreciate it. Dawn says, yeah, you did answer it. She says, I suppose maybe even listening to nature sounds would also, closing your eyes and listening to nature sounds would also be beneficial. Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so nice to have an alarm. If you use an alarm that goes off with nature sounds instead of like that blaring, I don't know, like I'm thinking about an old fashioned, like with the bells on top of the clock. But there are some other really, John says she listens to a lot of frequencies also. That's amazing. Let me check here. I don't see any other comments yet.
One thing that I would say about imagery that I really love is that your brain doesn't really discern between whether it's happening in what you would consider reality or your imagery. It's not that you don't know that you're imagining nature versus being in nature, but the effects are often the same. So when we bring ourselves into imagery experiences, we can have a very similar effect to what we would have if we were actually in nature.
That's really, really fascinating. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being with us. I learned a ton, and I hope that everyone who's listening did, and just like taking, a couple of minutes and I'm looking out because I'm like, I'm so grateful I can see the sky and see palm trees. And I think that really helps. And like when I was in New York, I was like looking out on another building, like you said. And if you are somewhere inside like that, just a few minutes of, getting that imagery, listening to those sounds can be super helpful. So Rachel, I know you have a couple of things that you would like to share with us, and for people who are really interested in more of this kind of information.
Okay. Well, a lot of what I do is help people rewire their nervous systems because in our culture, we're all out of whack, right? None of us escapes unscathed. So that's oftentimes the lens that I'm looking through. How do we rewire the nervous system to cultivate calm and connection and compassion and to generally feel happier? And I do that in a lot of ways. So I'm going to, you'll have in the notes a link to my a free practice called Take 5 to Reset. And it's a physical practice where we move through the muscles of the face. When the muscles of the face are tense, it sends a message to your nervous system that all is not well. Ooh. So when we can relax those muscles, which we often habitually tense, even though we feel just fine, we're sending mixed messages. So by relaxing those muscles, we can feel a sense of calm. So that's a free practice you'll have access to. And I am starting a 30-day course called Cultivating Calm and Connection, 30 Days to Rewire Your Nervous System. That course will start February 21st. And you'll see a link to that in the notes. And I'd love to have you if you're interested.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's given us a lot to think about. And I appreciate you very much, Rachel.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for bringing me on.
My pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.